At a number 10 spot, we have the Octagon House. This building is considered to be the most haunted home in all of DC, and after reading about this, I think it could be one of the most haunted places in North America. It was built by Colonel John Taylor back in the year 1801. The builder had its close connections to the presidents, and after the White House burned in 1812, President James and Dolly Madison lived there for a temporary time. Now it's claimed that the entire house is haunted by the daughters of Colonel John Taylor. His first daughter passed away before the War of 1812, and the other ones passed away shortly after the year 1817. They are known to follow visitors around until they decide to leave the house altogether. As well, the house has been said to hold slaves back in the day, and many say the spirits of these slaves still remain inside of the house. There used to be a ring inside of the building to call the slaves, but after the War of 1812, the bell would seem to be ringing non-stop. In another instance, a gambler was even shot on the 3rd floor of this building, and many visitors claim they still see his lifeless body on the bed during some nights. At a number 9 spot, we have the St. Elizabeth Psychiatric Hospital. Opening in 1855, St. Elizabeth was the first federally operated psychiatric hospital in the United States, and at the time, it would house as many as 8,000 patients. Over the years, many people came to this hospital for treatment of their mental illnesses, as well as to house many of the wounded during the Civil War. However, by the 1950s, the hospital was under heavy criticism for the way they treated their patients, which caused many to pass away there as well. Then over the years, they would begin to lose more and more patients until temporarily closing down in 2002. Now that the east side of the campus has a new facility with new patients, many workers have claimed that it's one of the most haunted places in DC. Overnight staff workers claim to hear constant groaning sounds in the places of the hospital that aren't being used. And also as well, many people claim to see the spirit of Dr. Walter Freeman, who can be seen in the morgue performing lobotomies, considering he was one of the pioneers of the psychosurgery. At number 8 spot, we have the Congressional Cemetery. The Congressional Cemetery, or the Washington Parish Burial Ground, was established all the way in 1807, and nowadays it has as many as 65,000 graves occupying the grounds. This number alone should tell you that you may feel the presence of more than a few entities in this area. One notorious ghost spotted in the area is Civil War photographer Matthew Brady. Story goes that the Congress promised him money to take war photos, but when he brought them the photos, they never ended up paying him, not even $1. So in the end, he died with nothing to his name. Nowadays, he terrorizes the graves of the government officials who denied him compensation, and if you try to take a photo of his ghost, you'll find that your device is now broken. Over the years, this place has gone through many different grave robbers, which led to many disturbed spirits scattered around the entire cemetery. So, for a warning, visit this place at your own risk. At number 7 spot, with the Omni Shoreman Hotel. This grand hotel was built in 1930, and ever since its opening, there has been hundreds of reports from visitors claiming to see something supernatural within. It all started when one of the hotel's financial partners named Henry Doherty moved his entire family from what is now known as Suite 870. On their first night, their maid Juliet Brown called the hotel desk in a panic to tell them that she wasn't feeling good, but then before anyone could get to her room, she just passed away. Soon after, Mr. Doherty's wife and daughter would pass away. This would make Henry distraught, leaving the hotel with that suite being unoccupied for the next 50 years. Then, when Henry's apartment was converted into a hotel suite and reopened, staff and guests would claim to hear the sounds of faint voices coming from the dark corners of the room. And many reported that around 4 a.m., all the electronics inside of the room, including the lights and the TV, would aggressively flicker for a short time period. Now the room has been called the Ghost Suite, and I dare any of you guys to try a night at this place if you're in the area. At number 6 spot, we have Escaping Alcatraz. Frank Morris was surprisingly an intelligent criminal with an IQ of over 130. He was born in Washington, D.C., and his parents abandoned him when he was only 11 years old, so he spent the rest of his childhood in foster homes. He was convicted of his first criminal offense at 13, and by his late teens had been arrested for crimes ranging from narcotic possession to armed robbery. He spent most of his early years in jail serving lunch to prisoners. The odd thing is that Morris was reportedly ranked in the top 2% of the general population in intelligence. He was measured by the IQ testing and he got a score of 133. He served time in Florida and Georgia, then escaped from the Louisiana State Penitentiary while serving 10 years for bank robbery. He was recaptured a year later while committing another burglary and sent to Alcatraz on January 20th, 1960 as inmate number AZ-1441. He was part of the infamous 5-person crew who managed to escape Alcatraz. The crew used a raft made of raincoats and fake heads they sculpted during their time there to just trick all the guards. In the hump of our list, we have the Old Brick Capitol. This building once stood where the USS Supreme Court building stands, so it has a very rich history associated with it. The Old Brick Capitol was built in 1815 and was used as a temporary Capitol building for the United States. Throughout its time, it also served as a private school, a prison, and a boarding house during the Civil War. During its time as a prison, it was one of the most abusive ones. It had poor living conditions, and most of the prisoners were far more depressed than in any other prison in the world. This lack of care and attention caused many prisoners to pass away in the process, so it's no surprise that many came back as vengeful spirits. Visitors to the land report hearing banging on metal bars and distant cries of former convicts pleading for their lives. Many of the people can hear a person crying throughout their entire visit. Despite being kind of annoying, I don't think you would be brave enough to tell a person to stop doing this, especially if it's a full-fledged ghost. At number 4 spot, we have the British soldier fire starter. It was during the War of 1812 that the Great Burning of Washington occurred. In this attack, many important buildings in the capital were burned down, including the White House, then called the Presidential Mansion. Then things got unexpectedly worse for the British. As the US government fled the White House, the British thought victory was near. But then a grand-scale thunderstorm alongside a tornado swept the entire area around the White House, killing both British soldiers and American civilians in the process. If you can imagine a Michael Bay movie, that's exactly how I picture this scene going down. Now, it's said that a lonesome British soldier whose garments date all the way back to the 1800s appears on the White House lawn every now and again. It's said that the soldier is still roaming around the lawn of the White House with a rather large torch, almost as if the flame was eternal. At number 3 spot, we have Mary Todd Lincoln. Wife of Abraham Lincoln, Mary Todd Lincoln was said to have practiced spiritualism in the White House frequently. Influenced by the death of her second son, spiritualism was practiced by Mary to communicate with him and others she held dear in the afterlife. She would report speaking to her late son daily and would conduct seances within the walls of the White House. As word broke out, desperate families would come to her seeking the unknown. And in the midst of the Civil War, many widowed wives came to her in order to speak to their husbands. Mary would begin to notice strange things in the White House, such as hearing stomping and swearing in the room of former President Andrew Jackson, known as the Rose Room. At number 2 spot, we have the Demon Cat. Spotted time and time again around the White House, the Demon Cat takes on many different variations, 2 different people appearing as a normal-sized cat to some and as large as an elephant to others. The Secret Service has reported seeing paw prints around the White House, which is surprising since no pets are allowed in this White House. The weird thing is that the cat only appears during a presidential switch or a national tragedy. Basically, we can call it the bearer of bad news, and potentially this is where we get the idea of an unlucky black cat. At a number 1 spot, we have an Illuminati-influenced street design. When people begin to look at Washington, D.C. from a bird's eye view, many have realized that the street designs incorporates the use of occult symbols, including an inverted pentagram with the bottom pointing directly at the White House. An anti-Masonic Christian named Ed Decker said, quote, "The satanic pentagram under which the White House sits is an open door through which Satan has access to our president." So the person who designed the streets was a visionary planner named Pierre-Charles L'Enfant. And to many, he was considered to be a Freemason or at least part of the Illuminati. However, after deeper research, I found that he was inspired by the city of Karlsruhe, Germany, so he didn't take inspiration from any other group. Anyways, many parts of the street resemble Christian crosses as well, so easily another conspiracy theory could be made. But who knows, maybe I'm wrong and he is related to some sort of satanic group. At a number 10 spot, we have Lake Shawnee Amusement Park. Hidden away in Princeton, West Virginia is the abandoned Lake Shawnee Amusement Park. When you look at photos of this place, it's hard to believe that this place isn't haunted. And in addition, the history of this place will confirm that belief. The park opened its doors in 1926 and was a great place to do all sorts of activities since it featured a swimming lake, racetrack, and concession stands, and even cabins for people to stay overnight. However, after 30 years after its opening, in the 1950s, there was a fatal accident within the park that caused concern all over the state. They say a young girl got crushed by a delivery truck when she was sitting on the swing ride. And around that same time, a young boy lost his life after he drowned in the swimming pool. The park ended up closing temporarily in 1967 due to a failed health inspection, but in 1987 it was reopened by a former employee of the park. However, a year later, they would uncover various Native American remains on the property, with a total of 13 skeletons of young children. Ever since, the park has been the hotspot of paranormal investigators and even Satanists, just because of the amount of paranormal activity inside of this park alone. At number 9 spot, we have Greenbrier Ghost. The Greenbrier Ghost story is very real and is the only case in the US when a ghost testimony convicted a real murderer. Story goes that there was once a lady named Zona who fell in love with a man named Trout Shoe. He was everything she would have wished for. He was charming, handsome, and even funny. However, in only a couple of months, Zona got sick and was bound to her home for weeks. However, one day, one of Trout's nephews decided to help Zona out at the home, but instead he found Zona's lifeless body. So he decided to call the doctor, but the doctor would look over her death and just diagnose it as death by childbirth. Now, here's where it gets kind of weird. When Zona was buried, her mother started to see full-blown apparitions of her appear right in front of her, and they would tell her that Trout Shue was the one who murdered her. And in July 1897, the mother testified this in court, and this actually led to Trout's arrest, where he would be convicted of first-degree murder. Could this really be the first case of a ghost testimony working in court, or was this just a mere coincidence? Let me know in the comment section below. At number 8 spot, we have the White Things. West Virginia has legends of a wolf-like creature that attacks brutally, however leaves no mark, howls, but it sounds like the screams of a person being murdered, and they run, but at speeds no one can even match. These are the White Things of West Virginia, otherwise known as the Devil Dog or Sheep Squatch. Out of all the sightings, the one that stands out the most is that of coal miner Frank Kazul. Back in 1929, he reported seeing the beast as he was walking home in Fairmont through the woods on Morgan's Ridge. Ever since that moment, the word spread quickly about these beasts that were lurking in the darkness of the night and the side of the mountains. In Cherokee mythology, the appearance of these white animals foreshadows a premature death in an individual, meaning that once a person sees the dogs, they are marked for death in the next few days to a week. So this would explain why searching for this beast was completely useless. At a number 7 spot, we have the West Virginia Penitentiary. Opening in 1876, the West Virginia Penitentiary in the town of Moundsville is the final place many criminals saw before they're executed. This is because during its 119 years of being active, approximately 1,000 men passed away here. These range from homicides within the jail and various forms of other executions. One spirit that can be found at the penitentiary is known as R.D. Wall, or inmate number 44670. He was a snitch in the prison, and in October 1929, 3 men ambushed him and butchered him into pieces using dull shivs. Ever since, his spirit is said to haunt the basement of the prison because this is where the tragic accident took place. Other than that, you have to realize that there are countless other tortured souls here, so it's not uncommon to hear strange screams and other noises echo throughout the cell blocks. Other legends of the place claim that the prison was built directly on top of Native American burial grounds, but regardless, it's already terrifying enough. At a number 6 spot, we have Spring Hill Cemetery. Located in Charleston, West Virginia is Spring Hill Cemetery, which overlooks the city and the river nearby. It was first established as an official cemetery in 1869, but it has gravestones dating all the way back to the 1700s, when Charleston had its first early settlers. In total, it is about 33,000 burials, which is 33,000 reasons why not to disturb the spirits that rest here. This place is known for their various tree species. However, many of these trees were used to take lives, such as lynchings and others taking their own lives. So combine the hundreds of unmarked graves and lynchings, and you have yourself a haunted place. Specifically in Potter's Field in the cemetery, you can find a large oak tree which there have been hundreds of hangings on, and if you come here at night, you may hear the sounds of choking and suffocating around this tree. In the top of our list, we have Hotel Morgan. Established in 1925 in Morgantown, West Virginia is Hotel Morgan. And this hotel screams luxury with its beautiful rooms, modern gym, and its expansive dining areas. Despite its undeniable beauty, Hotel Morgan is claimed by many to be very haunted as well. The room that is said to be the most haunted in the hotel is room 314. It's believed that a young girl drowned in the bathtub here in the early days of the hotel, and after that, every guest of room 314 has reported some strange occurrence during their overnight stay. Notorious guests of the hotel include Eleanor Roosevelt and Harry S. Truman, and during both their stays, they have recalled things they couldn't even explain. At number 4 spot, we have the Heyman House. Located in Sutton, Braxton County, West Virginia is the Heyman House, and is believed by many to be the most haunted house in the entire state. Built in 1894 by William Heyman, this house is a very historic place in the state with its rich interior craftsmanship and rare decorative materials. However, going through more recent owners and visitors, the locals claim that there are more than a few spirits living in the home. During the time Heyman lived at the house, he suffered the passing of his 8-year-old daughter and another one of his family members who died from strangulation. Visitors claim that the mirror in the foyer is guarded by a gray-haired woman, while the second floor is haunted by a woman in white. Others have seen a young girl running, which many believed is Heyman's 8-year-old granddaughter, but the only way to find out is to take a tour of this place yourself. Number 3, we have the Mothman. This creature is known worldwide, but did you know they originate in the state of West Virginia? Because Ohio seems like the place this type of creature would come from, right? The first ever recorded sighting of the Mothman took place on November 12, 1966 in Clendenin, West Virginia. Here, 5 men were preparing a grave in the cemetery when they encountered something they had never seen before. They said a brown winged creature lifted off from the nearby trees, and they also said it was not a bird, but more so like a humanoid. Ever since its initial sighting, places around the world start to have their own versions of the Mothman. If you ever want to catch a glimpse of one, your best bet is the old West Virginia Ordnance Works, which is known to locals as TNT area. Here, another sighting would occur as 2 young couples would spot a large winged creature that was about 7 feet tall. They would also claim that the creature traveled at speeds at around 100 kilometers an hour. And ever since, the creature was known to be spotted where bad luck was bound to happen. But regardless, many don't even know if it truly exists. What do you guys think? At number 2 spot, we have Sweet Springs Resort. Located in Gap Mills, West Virginia, is the now abandoned Sweet Springs Resort. And let me tell you, there's nothing sweet about this place anymore. It was created in 1792, and since its opening, it would be recognized for having a popular spa and hot springs. However, other places in this resort are not recognized for their good. For example, the old pool house in the resort served as a Civil War soldiers' barracks, tuberculosis sanatorium, and a nursing home. So best believe there are more than a few deaths at this resort. Nowadays, it's a paranormal investigator's paradise because after allowing tours to enter this place, many come out realizing that this resort is still infested with spirits. Many of them had doors closed on their fingers or even been pushed off of stairs, which just shows how unwelcome people are to this place. Yet, they still offer tours, and if you just sign a quick waiver, you and 18 others can stay inside of the resort for just one night. At number 1 spot, we have Weston State Hospital. This facility, located in West Virginia, was constructed during the time of the Civil War, and it was intended to keep about 250 patients, but ultimately held more than 2,400, including the notorious Charles Manson for a brief period. This place was far from good as numerous peoples were shackled to objects, lobotomized with ice picks, and subjected to terrible maltreatment in addition to extreme congestion, which only contributed to the hundreds of fatalities and palpable sense of agony inside of this place. There are many apparitions, including Ruth, the patient who is still insane and enjoys attacking people. In addition, there are uniformed army ghosts roaming the asylum's halls because it served as a temporary military base during the Civil War. Numerous people have reported hearing voices telling them to leave as well. And even Ghost Adventures crew investigated the asylum and came out saying, quote, a recipe for trapped souls. So visit and you may see why. At number 10 spot, Pfister Hotel. In the heart of Milwaukee, Wisconsin is the infamous and luxurious Pfister Hotel. When it opened up in 1893, it was unlike any other hotel at the time. It had features such as electricity, fireproofing, and thermostat controls, which was almost unheard of at the time. It's been open for over 130 years now, and during its time, countless of people have come forward to tell about the terrifying experiences they had inside of this hotel. For example, 2015 NL MVP winner Bryce Harper stayed at the hotel back in 2012. He would go on to tell ESPN that one night he woke up to find that the table in his room had moved to the opposite side and his clothes were folded near it on the ground. The next night he said that he couldn't sleep because all he could hear was the restless spirits. He eventually decided to switch rooms, and after further research, there was an article published on May 1983 claiming that the hotel was built on a private burying ground.
That explains a lot.
At number 9 spot, we have Boy Scout Lane. This isolated rural street in Linwood, Portage County is said to be one of America's most haunted roads. It's only less than a mile long, but it's notorious for the things that happen on this road. The road gets its name, Boy Scout Lane, because this is the location where a troop of Boy Scouts were murdered on their camping trip during the late 1950s. The case never ended up getting solved, but many people had their own theories. Some believe that the murderer was their scoutmaster, while others believed it was the bus driver who drove them to the woods. Regardless of whatever story is true, what is said is that these Boy Scouts haunt the forest around this stretch of road. Some who drive on this road see 4 distinct lights in the distance, which are supposed to resemble the 4 Boy Scouts looking to get through the forest. But if you decide to be brave enough and camp out there, you will most likely hear the sounds of footsteps and breaking branches coming in all sorts of directions in the middle of the night. And if you sleep in your car, you may wake up with childlike handprints on the vehicle. So if you can, try to avoid this street at all costs. At number 8 spot, we have the Rhinelander Hodag. This creature, native to the town of Rhinelander, Wisconsin, is said to have the strength of an ox, the ferocity of a bear, and the cunning of a fox. In basic words, this creature is the ultimate predator. Eugene Gene Shepard, a pioneer and lumber cruiser from Rhinelander, claimed to have captured this terrifying beast on camera in 1896, right before it pounced on him from a white pine log. The most dreadful sight was captured by a camera. A hairy creature 7 feet long and 30 inches tall with threatening tusks, powerful jaws, and sharp claws. However, in this case, it turned out to be a big hoax when a group of scientists came to visit Shepard after he allegedly caught one. Regardless, this creature has carved its name in the town of Rhineland, and if you decide to take a visit of the town, you'll find its logos on the town, school, you name it. At number 7 spot, we have the Bloody Headstone at Riverside Cemetery. Opening in 1870, the Riverside Cemetery is one of the oldest cemeteries in the town of Appleton, Wisconsin. While the graveyard stacked up over the years, there's one gravesite that is significantly different from the others. This is the case of the grave of Kate Blood. In past reports, they would call Kate either a witch, a murderer, or even a victim of murder. However, it was much more different than that. Born in 1851 as Catherine Blood, she lived a short life, only having reached the age of 23 before passing away from tuberculosis in 1874. Now, around Halloween every single year, when it's a full moon, people claim to see blood ooze out of her tombstone. Her tombstone is by the back of the cemetery, which made more people believe further that they tried to hide her for a reason. At number 6 spot, we have the Vampire of Graceland Cemetery. The town of Mineral Point in southwest Wisconsin was terrorized by a vampire for a short period of time. More specifically, these sightings were first reported back in 1981. It was a snowy night in 1981 when police officer John Pepper got calls saying that there was a mysterious figure that looked like a vampire walking around the cemetery. When the officer arrived, he immediately spotted the figure, but supposedly it began to run at incredible speeds to a point when it lost the officer within seconds. After the report was completed, not another vampire would be sighted until 23 years later in 2004. This is when several witnesses claimed that a strange slender man was attacking people by jumping at them from atop trees. The police arrived again only to see the figure run away at supernatural speeds. Then in 2005, a couple was fishing when they spotted a tall, pale, slender man with alleged fangs approaching them. Luckily, they noticed it immediately and pulled out a flashlight to see more clearly, and they claimed that the light started to physically hurt the man, which led more people to believe that it was a vampire. In the hump of our list, we have the Lake Winnebago water monster. In east central Wisconsin lies the shallow freshwater lake Winnebago. Back when the Winnebago tribe inhabited the shores of the lake, they would tell stories of a fish so big it would snatch up entire deer and moose from the edge of the water. And when I mean snatch, I mean it would eat the entire thing whole, including the antlers. It was so feared by the natives that they refused to cross the river no matter what happened. Over the next few years, reports were made, but nothing was as significant when a group of men spotted a dark figure floating near the coastlines. After further inspection, they were sure that they had spotted the monster, claiming it was around 15 to 20 feet long. Some locals claim that the monster is a prehistoric sea serpent that managed to survive through many grand level extinctions. Not much else is known about this creature, and many people to this day refuse to go near this body of water for this reason alone. But considering this lake has a max depth of 20 feet, I don't understand how something so large could fit in there. But that could just be me.
That's impossible!
At number 4, we have Summerwind. Located on the shores of West Bay Lake in Vilas County is the now abandoned mansion Summerwind, formerly known as the Lamont Mansion. Not much remains from this building as it's pretty much destroyed to a pulp, but when the building was still up, it had all sorts of controversy. During their 15-year stay at the home, the Lamont family would report many strange occurrences, but it wasn't until the mid-1930s until they decided to finally move out altogether. This was all because one evening, the basement door decided to spring open with the apparition of a man standing behind that door. As soon as they saw this, Mr. Lamont grabbed his firearm and shot at the figure twice before it just vanished out of thin air. Then in the 1970s, Arnold and Ginger Hinshaw bought the home in hopes to renovate it. Except they would be met with a whole load of issues as well. This included electrical problems, disappearing tools, and windows opening and closing by themselves while people were looking out of them. When the renovators decided to quit the project, the two decided to do it on their own, but when they removed the dresser, they noticed a crawl space that contained a real human skull and loads of black hair. At number 3 spot, we have Bloody Bride Bridge. The Bloody Bride Bridge has a wonderful name, doesn't it? Located in Stevens Point, Wisconsin, is said to be the most haunted bridge in the entire state. And I mean, just by reading the name, it's a no-brainer. However, more specifically, this is named Highway 66 Bridge, which doesn't really make a difference. Legend goes that one evening, a bride and a groom were driving over the bridge on their wedding night. When they were crossing, something happened, causing the couple to get into a fatal car accident on that very bridge. The bride ended up passing away, but nobody ever found out what happened to the groom. Ever since that evening, the bride has been reported to still be walking back and forth on the bridge. She's seen wearing the exact clothing she wore when she passed away, and that was a bloody wedding gown. Now people who have gone over this bridge have reported similar strange things. This includes many people believe they had hit a girl on the bridge, but when they walked out to inspect, there was just nothing there. But when they arrive back in their car, they only find her sitting in the back seat. Number 2, we have the Phantom Man of Highway 12. Mostly known for their Devil's Lake State Park, the town of Baraboo, northwest of Madison, has another person that is terrorizing their people. In this town is a stretch of road known as Highway 12. This is a place many say not to go near because it's the most haunted road in Wisconsin. The majority of drivers claim to see a man walking on the side of the road wearing only a green jacket and worn out jeans. However, when they pass him and continue to drive, they notice they spot the same man miles out as if he had beaten the car in speed. Then when they pass him again, it's as if he keeps transporting ahead of them. They say he keeps appearing in front of you because he's just waiting for you to pick him up. But I wouldn't recommend stopping because no one has ever lived the tale to say what happens when you decide to pick up this phantom hitchhiker. All the way at a number 1 spot, we have the Wood County Insane Asylum. If you decide to travel up the middle of Wisconsin, chances are you will enter the small town of Marshfield. This was a place that had the Wood County Asylum, which is considered by many to be a hellhole of a place. When the asylum was completed in 1911, the entire building could hold 250 patients and 19 staff. However, this would be far from a rehabilitation place because many of the patients in this asylum would only get worse the more time they spent there. Many patients didn't get the help they needed, so many of them took their own lives inside of this property. And this type of insanity even drove some of the staff to take their own lives. Now, the supernatural didn't start after the place closed down. It was happening since the opening. Apparitions of former patients and staff were seen both on the grounds and in the main building while the hospital was running. According to one tale, one guy even claimed to have seen the devil's face in the boiler room but left without coming back. Now the area is an attraction spot for ghost hunters because there's a very good chance you will encounter something if you decide to take a visit. At a number 10 spot, we have Big Nose George. Born in March 1834, George Pear, more so known as Big Nose George, was a big-time cattle rustler and a highwayman. So in other words, he was up to no good. Then in 1878, him and his gang went on to murder 2 law enforcement officers, and immediately after, every authority figure in Wyoming was after this guy. While he was on the run, he did the great decision to separate from his group members, which is a really smart idea. But Big Nose George had a big mouth. When he was on the run, he decided to hit up a small bar in Miles City, Montana, and here they would get extremely drunk and boast to others in the bar that they did in fact kill 2 law enforcement officers in Wyoming. Eventually, he was arrested. In prison, he would try to plan an escape only to be met with failure. When news broke out about his attempt to escape, an angry mob of around 200 people rushed into the jail and decided to take his life. After passing, doctors Thomas McGee and John Osborne took his body to study the chemistry of a criminal. Here they would cut out a portion of his head to investigate his brain, but no part went to waste. The cap of his head was used for an ashtray, pen holder, and a doorstop. It didn't stop there though. They then skinned him and then sent the skin to a tannery where he was literally made into a pair of shoes and then a medical bag. What the actual? Number 9, Pedro Mountain's mummy. The Shoshone Indians of Wyoming believed in a race of tiny people and said that they were responsible for the deaths of their comrades with the use of poisonous arrows. They described this race of people to stand from 20 inches to 3 feet tall. These people were known to be very hostile, not only to the natives, but to their own kind. It was said that they would take the life of their own people if they became too sick and couldn't help the community anymore. So basically, if you're old, you're dead. After years and years, there was no solid evidence of these little people until 1932, a 14-inch fully formed mummy was found in the San Pedro Mountains near Casper, Wyoming. When they examined the object, they confirmed that it did have a real human remains inside, although it was unclear if it was a native child or if it was a race of little people. Eventually, the mummy would be passed on through different people, but all of them had one thing in common. They would be faced with extreme bad luck as soon as they possessed the mummy, which led many people to believe that it was cursed. It was passed on to a businessman named Yvonne Goodman, who passed away shortly after. Then it was passed on to another businessman, Leonard Walder, who also passed away only a year after having it. Now the whereabouts of the mummy are completely unknown. At number 8 spot, we have Ghost Ship of Plate River. If you visit the Pathfinder Dam on the North Plate River, there's a small chance you might find a glimpse of the ghost ship. It's believed that every 25 years, a death ship appears out of the midst near the dam. The first ever recorded sighting of this eerie vessel was in 1862, when a trapper named Leon Weber reported a large wave of fog, then saying it took the form of a sailing ship with a mast and sails covered in silvery shiny frost. He said he saw people on board, but they're all covered in this shiny frost. When he looked closer, he saw someone that looked exactly like his fiancée at the time as well. He then returned home from work a month later and discovered that his fiancée passed away the day he saw the ship. Then there was another sighting 25 years later in 1887 when cattleman Gene Wilson saw the exact frosty ship appear out of nowhere. He would also report people on board, but all of them were frozen, and as soon as he went home, he found out that his home was burned to ashes and his wife was lifeless 100 yards from the house. Number 7. Francis E. Warren Air Force Base. Located 3 miles west of Cheyenne, this Air Force Base was first established as Fort D.A. Russell in 1867. Named in honor of Civil War Brigadier General David A. Russell, it is the oldest continuously active military installation in the Air Force. Along with these old buildings, the legends are told that many of the old cavalry soldiers also continue to linger, often seen walking up the grounds or in the dormitories. Another story tells of a spirit that is said to harass female members of the security team. One of the most famous stories on the base takes place in Quarters 80, often referred as the Gus Quarters. During the early days, Quarters 80 was home to a young officer, but unfortunately for him, he was out on duty for the majority of the time, so one day he came home very exhausted and found a soldier entertaining his wife in their bedroom. The husband was furious and was looking to eliminate the man by any means necessary, but the soldier decided to make a decisive action and leap out the window. Instead of escaping, he accidentally hung himself by getting stuck on the clothesline outside of the home. Ever since this moment, the Gus Quarters are known for their supernatural activity, from objects being thrown across the room to just being grabbed out of nowhere. Number 6. The Ghostly Bride of Plains Hotel. In the Plains Hotel of Cheyenne, Wyoming, locals claim that there is a spirit of a bride that haunts everyone who steps in. Story goes that a lady named Rosie and her groom were on their honeymoon at the hotel. As the night went on, the husband decided to step out and get some drinks at a nearby bar. When Rosie arrived to fetch him, she noticed him walking upstairs with an escort, so of course she was shocked and decided to secretly follow them. This is when Rosie followed them all the way up to the room and in a jealous rage shot both of them with the husband's firearm, taking both of their lives immediately. After this, she would regret her actions and return back to the honeymoon suite to take her own life. Now, if you enter the Plain Hotel, you may be met with apparitions of the 3 people involved in the story. Rosie walks down the halls with a bright blue dress, which would have been the dress for her wedding. In the hump for our list, we have the Devil's Tower. This 1,200-foot tower of rugged rock is known as the Devil's Tower. It is located in northeast Wyoming, and when you look closer in the area, there is nothing that even closely resembles this behemoth. It's very unique in nature as it has all these grooves surrounded all around the rock. Although these can be explained by natural phenomena like a former volcano, Native Americans around the area have a completely different belief. Many claim that back in the day, the natives were being attacked by these gigantic bears, so to defend themselves, they would go up the Devil's Tower and pray to the Great Spirit to save them. They claim this is why the tower had grooves, because it was from the bears trying to claw themselves up on it. Number 4. Wyoming Frontier Prison. Located in Rawlins, Wyoming, the Wyoming Frontier Prison has the reputation of being one of the toughest prisons in the Wild West. Opened in 1901, it housed some of the most violent inmates, featured a dungeon, botched executions, and was known for rampant violence. Now a museum, employees and visitors alike have reported ghostly encounters. There have been apparitions spotted in the cell blocks and reports of a malevolent spirit in the dungeon who has threatened visitors. The prison is so notorious that it was featured on an episode of Travel Channel's Ghost Adventures, and ghost hunters have captured orbs on camera, but let me know what you guys think about that. The museum offers haunted Halloween night tours if you want to have a ghostly encounter of your own. Number 3. Heart Mountain Relocation Center. Starting with an old building originally used for an irrigation project prior to the attack on Pearl Harbor, the Heart Mountain Relocation Center began construction on barracks and facilities to relocate American families of Japanese descent in June 1942. Over the next 3 years, the camp would house over 14,000 people. Just to put that into perspective, if they made this prison a town, it would be the 3rd largest city in Wyoming based on population alone. As World War II occurred, many horrors occurred within as well. Abuse, torture were just some of the things that the Japanese had to go through, with many people passing away as well. It eventually got shut down at the end of the war, but the discrimination towards the Japanese was too big that they couldn't let it go that easily. Today, the camp has been reinvented to be an informational, interpretive center, educating Americans about this dark time about our past. People working at the place claim to see these shadow people in the halls when it gets dark as well. Number 2. Old Faithful Inn. This is yet another story of a deadly wedding. I don't know what it is in Wyoming, but what's with all these bloody wedding stories? Are y'all not happy there? Built in 1903, Yellowstone's Old Faithful Inn is considered a National Historic Landmark. This, of course, means that it comes with some haunting tales. The Headless Bride of the Old Faithful Inn is the story of tragedy. A wealthy woman from back east fell in love with a con artist, told by her family that if she marries this man, they would disown her. She then took her inheritance and ran away with him. On their honeymoon in Yellowstone, he chopped off her head and ran away with her money long before before they found the body. Now the headless bride has been spotted wandering the hotel in search of her lost love. All the way at our number 1 spot, we have the Sheraton Inn. The Sheraton Inn has been a community landmark for nearly 130 years. Miss Kate, one of the beloved employees and patrons, is said to have never left. In 1901, Miss Kate moved to Sheraton and began working at the inn. She moved into a room on the 3rd floor in 1906, where she would spend the rest of her life. A friend placed her ashes in the walls after her death in 1968, all while the inn was being renovated. She is now the innkeeper's guardian. You might feel her in a cold spot or have your lights turned on and off if you're at the inn. Coming at number 10, La Milagrosa. In Havana's main cemetery named the Necropolis Cristobal Colon, there are reports that the grave of La Milagrosa lies there and is spotted by many who walk the grounds. Since being built in 1876, this cemetery was considered to be very holy, and this is where many people would go for prayers. One statue in the cemetery in particular stands out, not because it's beautiful and one of the largest, but because of the haunting yet saddening story behind it. La Milagrosa is often linked to the tomb of Emilia Goyi de la Hoz, since she passed away during childbirth and was buried with her baby at her feet. Her husband Jose used to visit her tomb every day for 40 years until his death. In a ritual, he used to knock her grave 3 times with his hand over the grave. Her husband Jose used to visit her tomb every single day for 40 years until his death. In a ritual, he used to knock her grave in 3 times to wake her up, talking to her while keeping his hand over the grave. Many people would see him talking to her grave, and eventually others began to do the ritual, only to be met with La Milagrosa. Here she is said to grant your wishes, but with consequences too big to consider. At number 9 spot, we have Madre de Agua. This creature is straight out of Cuban mythology, and when translated means mother of the water. This creature appears as a giant boa snake that is larger than any snake we see today and is as thick as a palm tree. This creature also appears with 2 horns on the side of their heads, scaly skin, and it's tough enough to stop bullets or sharp objects from piercing its skin. See, when I thought of the mother of the water, I thought of a nice water spirit that can calm waves, save drowning people, but no, we got this aggressive and dangerous creature as our mother. It's said to inhabit the rivers and lakes in Cuba, and the reason they do this is because wherever they are, the water will never dry out. If you encounter this creature, then you're probably screwed because it's immortal, and anyone who has tried to kill it or capture it passes away pretty quickly. I mean, when we have a large snake, we know nothing can come good from it. Just look at Adam and Eve, or even look at the movies like Anaconda or Snakes on a Plane if you don't believe me. At number 8 spot, we have the Light of Yara. This is a tale most Cubans are told when they're children, so this was pretty popular back there. The Light of Yara, or Luz de Yara, follows Cuba's Aboriginal past. So, a Spaniard by the name of Atui led a rebellion against Spanish opposition back in the 16th century. They got overwhelmed and had to flee to Baracoa, which was a town in Cuba. It was a very beautiful town. They defended it, but eventually got overwhelmed yet again, and Atui later got captured and burned at the stake in Yara in February 2nd, 1512. So now locals claim that since his passing, a mysterious light can be seen in the fields of Yara. They believe his soul has become the light and wanders the fields endlessly. Fishermen claim that when the light is seen near them, the fish come in boatloads and they won't bite you. Except if you decide to boast about yourself or even mock the Light of Yara, the light will follow you until you are driven to insanity. At number 7 spot, we have Hotel Nacional de Cuba. The feeling of being in this hotel is said to feel like a party scene from The Shining. Beautiful yet terrible. Opened as the National Hotel of Cuba on December 30th, 1930, the hotel was designed by the prestigious architectural firm McKim, Med & White, which also designed such iconic buildings as Columbia University in New York City and the Boston Public Library. Legends hold that a variety of ghostly figures have been seen throughout the hotel, including the ghost of Frank Sinatra himself, who famously performed here to entertain a meeting of some of the United States' most notorious mobsters. Another frequent haunting occurrence includes seeing the antique hands that indicate the location of elevators between floors moving wildly and without reason, adjusted by unseen hands. This hotel still stands, but the large ballrooms and dining halls that are less occupied and are noticeably darker may have a thing or two to do with the haunting aspect of the hotel. At number 6 spot, we have Guantanamo's ghost prisoners. The military prison at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, took its first 20 detainees in 2002. Despite various calls to shutter it, it still stands almost 20 years later. It was built in order to house prisoners captured in Afghanistan and other terrorists. At its peak, it housed just under 800 people, with many of the prisoners being detained without any sort of trial. In the early days of the detention camp, many of the prisoners were tortured physically and mentally. So this prison was the real deal and is seen in many movies and TV shows to this day, way depicting a lot of this. Except after all of this abuse, death, and injustice, the spirits have been said to be very aggressive in this prison. In short, it's a terrible place for terrible people, but since many were taken here without trial, I really wonder how many were innocent and ended up passing away in this very prison. In the hump of our list, we have the Cuban Missile Crisis. So this was a time when the world almost ended, so this had to take a spot on this list. The 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis is considered to be the most intense 13 days of the Cold War, and this is because one single misstep could have meant nuclear destruction all over the world. Following the failed Bay of Pigs invasion, the missile crisis began when US surveillance discovered that the Soviets sanctioned missiles all the way in Cuba. And why did this scare Americans? Because Cuba is only 90 miles away from Florida. So the US debated whether to send an air raid or perhaps an invasion of Cuba to destroy these supposed missiles. After these 13 days of intense negotiations, with everyone a millimeter away from nuking each other, President John F. Kennedy and the Soviet leader were able to make a deal. At number 4 spot, we have the house in Pinar del Rio. Although the date of when this house was built is unknown, what is known is that it has been abandoned for over 20 years. This property is located right at kilometer 78 of the highway that connects Havana with Pinar del Rio. And every time someone decides to visit this abandoned house, they come out reporting something very strange and sometimes supernatural. Former residents of the home have all left due to feeling uncomfortable in the house. For example, couples who stayed would slowly begin to argue more and more aggressively. Some have told others that it's impossible to sleep at night because of the constant nightmares you get in this house. At number 3 spot, we have the Leeward Point Field. The US military airfield, Leeward Point Field, is located near the famous Guantanamo prison right along the scenic coast. As you may be aware, Guantanamo is a US naval base that uses Leeward Point Field for air transport. Much of the area is tranquil and park-like with views of the rocky coastline. Many people enjoy taking early evening strolls in the area as well. Many people have reported seeing a woman dressed in white though, possibly in a white uniform, walking dangerously close to the cliffs. She appears friendly at first but then leaps to her death on the rocks below. Bystanders rush helplessly to the scene only to discover nothing and no one down below. At number 2 spot, we have Finca Vigia. This beautiful residence was built in 1886 and is located in San Francisco de Paula Ward in Havana, Cuba. At first glance, this house looks very cozy, bright, and very livable, but that's until you hear what's really on the inside. The Hemingway family would live in the house from the mid-1930s to 1960. Ernest Hemingway was a famous American novelist and journalist. He would be constantly writing on his typewriter in the home, but just after he moved out in 1960, he would take his own life in his home in Idaho. Now it's said that his spirit is still within this house, since this is the spot he spent a large majority in, along with his creative ideas. Staff report hearing a typewriter but always in another room. They go to look but only to find no one there and no typewriter. All the way at our number 1 spot, we have Cementerio de Reina. This cemetery is essentially an outdoor crumbling art museum. This was a monument to plantation farming and wealthy trade barons when it first opened in the 1800s. Most of the tombs here are crowned with massive statues of beauty and grace. In recent years, the cemetery has fallen into disrepair and has been targeted by grave robbers. Sleeping Beauty statue is one of the many statues that stands out to most of the visitors. The young woman buried there was promised to an older wealthy plantation owner, but her heart belonged to a young local boy instead. When her wedding drew near, she ran off and married her true sweetheart. Unfortunately, she died soon after of cholera. Regardless of her betrayal, the older man buried her in the family space and erected the large statue that stands today, a restless spirit in life and death.